Data Storytellers. Today, I'm here with Aaron Chapman, who is the Senior Director of Analytics and Insights for the Sam's Club team over at Procter & Gamble. Great to have you with us, Aaron.
Thanks, Paul. Excited to be here.
To start with, just tell us a little bit about your background. I took a look before we started. Can see you've been at P&G for a good number of years now, but LinkedIn can only share so much.
Yeah, for sure. So I think I've been here for a little over 13 years so far. And, I would say I've kind of done probably two main things as I've been here. For the first half of my career here, I was working more in the digital marketing and e-commerce space. And as you can imagine, in those times, we had over 100 brands at P&G and a global company. So we had a lot of websites and social media networks, starting with Facebook, et cetera. And that was generating a lot of data. And that was really when I started to kind of get a little bit into analytics and data. And at the time, actually, we used to do these business reviews where leadership would come into a room and we would kind of in real time, I would have to walk them through the data and kind of start to tell stories with what was going on with the business. But also, I think at that time, I kind of learned the importance of making suggestions and suggesting based on the insights that we were seeing and what was going on, things that we should do differently in order to change the trajectory of what was going on. So that was kind of the digital e-commerce space. And then over the last 6 or 7 years, I've been working more on our sales teams. So as you said here today, working with our Sam's Club team. So P&G, we have often sales teams co-located with our largest retail partners. So I'm here in Arkansas with Walmart and Sam's, and so really our role here is to just build the joint business together with Sam's Club. So in my role currently, I would say really is about bringing the power of data analytics and consumer and shopper insights to just build the joint business with Sam's.
Interesting. We're definitely going to be talking about a lot of the insights you've had, the experiences with storytelling and actually building those teams as well. What do you like most about the job? Because you've been with P&G for 13 years, as you said, working in e-commerce and then building up to this Senior Director of Analytics role. What specifically interests you about working in the data analytics space?
Yeah, so I would say, P&G is a very consumer-focused company. We think everything we really do is focused on how we better serve the consumer with our products, with our brands, with our messaging, and really understanding the business at a detailed level, understanding consumers and shoppers and their motivations of why they're buying what they're buying, or really what their needs truly, or maybe their unmet needs in a particular category. I think data analytics and really also the more qualitative side of understanding the shopper at a detailed level, I think is really foundational to doing that. And so that's probably the most exciting thing about my role is really seeing the impact in the day-to-day business of the work that I do or that the team does, of identifying insights, making those suggestions, and then seeing that actually play out in the marketplace with strategies and seeing the business results. I think for me that's the most exciting thing.
Interesting. So you've been in the FMCG space for many years now. How do you see data and analytics, and how have you seen that progress over that time? Just in the consumer goods space, let's say.
Yeah, I think that the questions that we ask over that time probably don't necessarily change a whole lot, right? I mean, I kind of alluded to it a moment ago around just understanding the motivations of the shopper, or what are their unmet needs, or how can we change a strategy to better serve them. So I think those types of questions about the business or about the shopper, and then about the business, kind of what am I selling, what's working, what's not working, where are there opportunities to accelerate the business. I think those types of questions are fairly constant, but the way that we answer them is changed quite a bit. So even, and part of it is obviously, I think part of it's due to the technology that's available and the skills that we have now versus maybe 10 years ago. But I think there's probably a couple things that have changed. I'd say one, I think we've shifted a bit from, you think about the research side and the more the consumer side. I think we've shifted a bit from there was probably a time where, we fielded a lot of major research studies, right? Everything that we did, we probably, kind of fielded as a big research study, and we still do that for sure. But I think there's a lot more, DIY going on as well, just because the data is available. It's easy and faster to kind of answer questions based on the data and the tools that we have. I think the second thing probably that's changed is the depth of the insights that you can get to based on, again, kind of the level of data that we have, right? So maybe if 10 years ago we knew, what was selling of one of our products in the total market, maybe now we know, by hour, right? For example, what's selling. So I think just the level of granularity and specificity you have in the data is a lot higher now. So I think you're able to get to deeper insights as well.
Absolutely. So also with this data analytics in mind and actually being able to get more insights from the customer, what do you think are the greatest opportunities for ambitious FMCG companies and also data leaders today?
Yeah, I think that, on the company side, I guess I would say, just like anything else we do, right? I mean, data analytics is one thing that we do as a company, right? I think it's really about how do you focus the efforts that you have, the investment and the efforts that you have on the right areas, right? How do you right size that for the opportunity that you have? Because, just like anything else, you just like we could choose to build, one manufacturing site or 10. I think you can choose in data analytics how much you want to invest and where, to maximize the outcome of the business. So to me, like, I think the biggest opportunity is just how do you spend the time and the energy on the things that really matter and the things that are really going to move the needle with, the outcomes that you have. I think on the data analytics side, I think part of it is really just constantly maintaining the focus of what are we trying to solve for, right? So, we've all been part of projects in the past where maybe you started down a path to do something or to build a capability or something like that, and then you get to the end and you realize that it doesn't actually, meet the need that you thought it would. And so I think that's why it's just so critical as an analytics leader to be lockstep with, with the business, with the strategy that is, currently had to be able to focus the data, the analytics, the data strategy, the projects that you're doing in a way that will have the biggest impact possible.
Yeah, super interesting stuff. And I want to talk a lot about how those projects actually formulate and what your experiences are in those, in the sense that a lot of data analytics tends to come down to, okay, how can I convince people of the merits of what I would like to achieve? It's got business value, it has personal value to me, there's this all-encompassing value proposition, but how do I get that over the line? So you mentioned earlier about storytelling. So I guess my next question would be something like, how did you use storytelling techniques, or how do you fit storytelling into your role when you're trying to get these projects over the line?
Yeah. So I think honestly, it's been an evolution for me on that. If I look back years ago, maybe, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, when I was in a different role, like as an analyst, one of the jobs that I had was basically, to look at the data and come back with suggestions, things that we should do differently. Could be internal, so internal to P&G, or external to whoever the partner we were working with. And I think at that time, that's basically how I would handle it, right? Like, I would see the question, I'd say, oh, I know exactly the data that I need to answer that. I'd go find it, and I would to me make a very clear suggestion of what needed to be done based on the numbers, right? It's very clear. But I think, for example, I remember one time we were trying to propose a certain project internally, and I did the analysis on what the opportunity was at the market for us to expand into that category, very, very high dollar amount, et cetera. I went in and basically, at the time, leadership wasn't interested, right? And over time, I think what I realized is really probably two things when it comes to storytelling. I think one is what we're talking about, well, first of all, we're talking to people, right? This is not just about the numbers. So I think that you have to you have to bring in the human element here, whether that's about the relationships that you have, or whether it's, really just, if you think about who we're solving for, again, P&G, we're creating products for consumers, right? And so I think we have to maintain that focus as we're thinking about the opportunity, the data that we're bringing. We need to think about how does that actually improve, the experience of the shoppers that we're trying to serve. I think the second thing is, and I said it earlier, but I just can't stress enough, I think, the importance of really, really understanding the strategy that the business has at the time, right? And tailoring the things that you're doing, the suggestions that you're doing toward that strategy. Because I think if you don't, I think it's really a matter of, whether what you're bringing will get implemented or not, and most likely.
Yeah, I love the idea of this human element of engaging and inspiring people, because that's the missing ingredient. That's kind of what we based our organization on, right? Is that there are these really intelligent data people out there who may be very process orientated, but are less orientated to how business actually functions from a human sense. It's driven by people. It's not driven by machines or manufacturing or particular tools. It's driven by the individuals who are a part of that organization. That's what will make or break it, whether it's a function or the entire organization, right? It's built on these foundations. So what do you think are the qualities of these leaders who actually inspire these real change? Just taking it very down to its base level, like the personality traits of good leaders who understand both the data side, but also the human element of data analytics transformation.
Yeah, I think I'd say a few things. One, I think it does start with competence. Like, I think in any job that you're doing, right, you got to be nailing the core part of the job, right? So I think if it's data analytics, I think you need to be highly competent in that field. I do think that's first, but I think once you've got that right, then I do think the next one is probably the ability to build relationships and influence, right? Because again, I think that, and part of that one is, I think, communicating complex ideas in a simple way. Because we've all been in situations where you're sitting in a presentation, someone's talking, and it kind of takes them 10 minutes to explain something. And people, oftentimes leaders of companies, right, they just don't have the time to spend on something that could be, covered in just a matter of a couple minutes. And so I think that, really around building relationships, influence, but also communication, I just think is so key, and how you deliver the message. I talked a little bit about really understanding the strategy. I would go so far as to say, I think in my job, like, I look at it as, I'm an owner of the business, right? Like, I don't, the metrics that I need to deliver are really the same as those of my boss, right? In terms of who leads our multifunctional team. And maybe I'll come back to that one. I think the last one is to be a continuous learner. I think that, in this space today, things are changing very rapidly. I think the tools that we use are changing. The way that we need to think about answering the questions or doing the analysis is changing. And so I think you've got to be able to continually learn to stay up to date on what the best methodologies are. So
I love this all-encompassing philosophy, but at the heart of it is what you said at the start, which is building relationships, having good communication skills, using your influence in the business to actually leverage results. So what role did these skills play in your success as a professional throughout your career?
Yeah, I think, for me, I think it's really that. I'll give you an example. So someone told me, a couple of people actually told me recently, what, I think that you could work in any function at P&G. And to which I said, no, I don't actually think that's true. But I think that and this was coming from folks in some of our sales leaders, and I think that what I interpret that is, one, I don't really think that's the case. I don't think I could go do product supply or sales. I don't have a decade of experience in that. But what I think it says for me is that I've gotten enough into the strategy of what the business needs to deliver, and really understand that enough to to really talk in their language, right? In the leadership's language of what we need to do. And because I think the moment you begin to talk to them about, the data strategy or the tech you want to go buy or whatever, like just based on that, I think you lose, like you lose it, right? You have to always bring it back to what it's going to deliver for the business toward the objectives that we have. So I think for me, to answer your question, I think I just probably tend to, think of myself as maybe even a business owner first, because I think it's that important as you think about, how you're gonna to develop your strategy to serve that.
I think that you exercise a lot of humility there, which is actually a really key trait that we talk about here at the Data Storytellers. But one thing I really want to touch on is this whole paradox between being just simply the head of the function, but as you mentioned, like that business owner. So what do you find is the best practice in data leaders taking on more business ownership from your experience?
Yeah, I think that probably the best thing the best thing I've seen work, is kind of this kind of an apprenticeship model, right? So I think you've got to find someone who can help you get there, right? So I think if you're thinking, man, I just wish that the recommendations I was making were landing more, or I just wish that I could, have the effectiveness that I want to have in this meeting or whatever it is. I think you've got to, I think one way to do it is to find someone who does it well and ask them, to give you feedback, or ask them to come up with a plan, right? Because I think that, just like anything else, I think you can break it down into focus areas or things that you need to accomplish in order to make the progress that you want to make, right? And so I think, one way would be talking to that person, but I think the outcome of that should be to come up with a plan of what are a few of the things that I should probably go do, what are the few of the things that I should go learn more about, and then what are the areas where I can ensure I'm getting kind of like fast cycle feedback, based on things that I'm doing to continuously improve. I mean, I think this kind of apprenticeship model or mentorship or whatever you want to call it, but really learning from folks who are doing that well, because I think there's a lot of nuance, right? From case to case, from role to role, from person to person that you're dealing with. And so I think if you can find somebody who's doing it well, I think that probably is a great place to start.
I love this idea of apprenticeship. It kind of reminds me of Star Wars, which in my opinion is one of the greatest stories ever told. At least A New Hope is anyway. Maybe more recently less so. But it's really about if you look at the Obi-Wan, he's like the Jedi, right? And Luke is this apprentice who he doesn't really know what's going on. He has a particular skill set, i.e., he has the Force, but he needs to learn to harness that and to be able to use that in the right way. And that's kind of like Obi-Wan's role. That's kind of a theme that spread throughout sorry, I'm just kind of a Star Wars geek, so I'm just kind of making these weird parallels with data. But
Yeah.
it's super interesting because with the whole business ownership, the stakes are much higher than sitting there watching a movie and absorbing it, right? It's if you can't nail down these skills and you don't have that humility to be able to go, look, I have this skill set, but I need to improve in these areas in order to, it's kind of a force multiplier, right? Because if you have a good skill set and you're weaker in another, but then you bring them together and they become this powerful force, right? And that's really what I think where the bridge between that is communications, influence, and persuasion, and the stuff we've been talking about today. I think with that in mind, though, one thing I'd like to touch on with that apprenticeship idea is the idea of trust. So where do you think trust fits into this? Because I think there needs to be that mutual trust, but in a big business, in any business really, trust can be kind of a touchy issue, kind of a trust currency, I would say. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. And actually, I probably moved past that a little bit in the last answer, but when I was talking about competence of the leader in data analytics, I think that part of that is I think that there is an expectation in that role that you are kind of, in some cases, the white coat, or bringing the truth, whether it's popular or not, based on what the data says. Now again, we can choose to make whatever decision we want based on that, but I think that it's important as the analyst, as the analytics leader, to bring the truth, right, of the situation that's happening, so that, because we all have our opinions, right? There's a lot of biases to think through and deal with them we don't even realize we have when we're doing things. But I think that, it's very important as part of the role, I think, to be bringing things that are balanced, the balanced perspective. So I think that's important, and I think 9 times out of 10, that in itself will lead to trust. When folks know that what you're bringing is what the data says, right? Not some sort of spin on it, based on objectives you have or things like that.
And with that in mind then, so you don't have trust as the start state, obviously. You need to build that. So what do you think are some of the best questions to ask when building trust?
Yeah. One of the things that I sometimes suggest is, like, at P&G, one of the things we like to do when we join a new team or enter a new role is kind of schedule 30 minutes or whatever, join up with each person, or at least the people you're going to be working with, and just kind of get to know the person and kind of learn more about each other. But I think that's a nice place to start. I think that just establishing those relationships, again, we are all people working together, so I think it's about establishing that connection with the people that you're working with every day, right? I think at the same time, though, through those interactions, I think you can start to ask questions about, what are those people, those leaders, what are they kind of struggling with today? Like, if they could, wave a magic wand and fix a problem, or capture an opportunity, whatever it is, like, what would that be? And I think that as you start to understand that, I think that it can help you, with a little bit with where to focus your time, maybe up front. And maybe through that process, you identify something that they've been struggling with, that you think, oh, well, I could actually do that pretty quickly, based on what I have access to. And maybe you do that, and you start to get kind of some of those quick wins. And then they that person realizes, like, hey, okay, this person they're listening, they're focusing their time and energy on what I'm talking about. And I think it's probably easier to do that up front, because you don't, we all know when you're a little longer in a job, the more things that kind of, come up, and inertia is a powerful force. But I think early on, is probably the best time to do that.
So with your role in mind then, how do you think you've managed to keep that inertia going? Is it built on that foundation of trust, or are there other aspects and elements of this that kind of will come together to build those foundations?
Yeah. I think trust. I think trust is a big one. Again, I think you always need to, again, come back to what is the challenge that we need to solve, the business objective that we have, and I think probably the other one is, I think you also need to continue to take a step back, and you can decide what frequency you do this. But when you're setting the data strategy, or you have the kind of the prioritization of what you're going to work on, what the team's going to work on, I think the other thing you have to do is you have to continue to look at that and ask questions of, am I reinventing myself, or are we changing the work that we're doing to reflect the current business reality? And I think that when you do that, I think people realize that you're in tune with what's going on, and you're changing based on kind of based on the current reality of the business. I think that's another one, that it can be easy to kind of maintain a status quo, but I think you've got to constantly look ahead and see, do you need to shift what you're doing based on what's going on.
How do you approach the education of the organization? So what I mean by that is, when you're trying to build this data-driven culture within P&G for your function, how do you cascade that throughout the business?
Yeah, well, I think the good news is that I think P&G is a fairly data-driven company. I think that most people are pretty comfortable with at least the concept of making decisions based on data, because I think we've been doing that for a long time. I think the sources of data and the granularity and whatever have changed, but I think in general there's a pretty high familiarity. That being, I think that there's probably a few areas that we focus on, despite that. I think one is data literacy, or familiarity in the data that we have on the business, the tools that we have on the business. So of course we have things that we do with the teams to build their and not just our analytics teams, but the the multifunctional teams, to build their familiarity with the whatever the tools that we have to kind of keep the pulse of the business. We probably do trainings and stuff like that. I think that's a foundational thing, just to kind of keep people up to speed on what is the latest, greatest thing that we have that you should be using to understand what's going on with the business. I think beyond that, though, I think that we start to, really maybe one of the biggest challenges that we have to solve as we think about, even shifting some of the things that maybe we used to do maybe manually or without data, to a more data-driven process. I think as we think about those transformations, I think so much of this is really about mindset. And when a leader or a person thinks about how to solve a particular problem, like does the first place they go to, oh, actually we could use data, or we could use technology or automation to solve that, or do they go somewhere completely different, like to solve that? I think that mindset it drives so much of the way that we actually execute things as a company. And so one of the things that I think is also important is to take the time when it makes sense to kind of inspire what's possible, right? So again, I think you take a relevant question or area that we're facing today, but then you really expand it on what could be possible if we could better leverage data analytics, automation, AI to really completely change the way that we do that process. So I think envisioning what the future could look like, inspiring with that, and then once people kind of, I think, are on board there, then it's about, okay, how can we build a plan to start down that path.
Super interesting stuff. So what role do you think that data analytics leaders play in these transformations today? Do you see them as like firefighters? Are they trying to win over executive, again, in the context of your role and your experience, what role do you think they play?
Yeah, I think that it's probably different by organization or company, but I think for me, I think that it's really, you're playing at the intersection of the technology, the data, what's possible, with that intersection of that together with what the business strategy are, what the goals, the vision is, right? So I think uniquely, like, I feel at least that I'm positioned to bring those two together to then represent what I think we should, what changes we should make, what investments we should create to be able to then achieve that vision. So for me, it's about bringing those two sides together, in order to have the highest.
Well, Aaron, it's been a fantastic episode, some really interesting insights there. What are you most excited about at the moment, just in your role?
I think, that's probably to come back to maybe where I started a bit. Like, I think that probably the thing I'm most excited about on a day-to-day basis is just enabling our team to make better decisions, to better serve the consumer with the data, the analytics, the insights that we have. And I think that takes a few different paths. In some cases, it's about how do we, we're recruiting the best talent to be analysts on the team, but then developing them to be, even stronger leaders in the business. Or I think probably the other one is, how do we shift, some of the work that we're doing and really leverage, instead of, kind of leveraging data analytics as something that is run in parallel, how do we really leveraging analytics and AI to drive the process? I think those types of transformations as well are probably the things that are most exciting to me right now.
Last question. What advice would you give for aspiring data leaders?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest thing would be, I'd say one, again, I think it starts with the competence. So I think you've got to go out and make sure you have the plan to be the best possible, kind of fill in the blank role, whatever role it is that you can. So whether that's data scientist, data engineer, data analyst, whatever it is, like making sure you've got a plan to get the skills in place and then continue to learn those skills as they evolve. I think that's the first thing. But I think beyond that, I'd say, identify the things that maybe the other types of skills that you think you need to build based on feedback that you've gotten, whether that's communication, other soft skills, et cetera, and then build a plan to do that as well, right? Whether that's the mentorship or apprenticeship that we talked earlier, whether that's trainings or just getting feedback from people in real time. But I think just being intentional about, kind of putting together the plan to achieve those goals.
Be intentional and be rigorous. Great advice from Aaron Chapman. Thanks so much for coming on the show, and we hope to have you on again soon.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it.